Okay, so for the last half of this lecture, we're going to be transitioning into an introduction to pulmonary physiology. Right? So our cells are constantly utilizing oxygen. We already know that. We utilize oxygen in manipulating metabolic reactions. Our goal is to produce ATP for energy, and one metabolic byproduct is carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide can decrease our pH. That is why it is just as important to eliminate CO2 as it is to intake O2. Our drive to breathe is actually to eliminate CO2. Our respiratory system needs to blow off this CO2 very quickly and efficiently. Why? Because two major threats to homeostasis are change in pH and change in temperature. And if we have too much carbon dioxide, that will alter our pH. So our actual drive to breathe, number one, is to eliminate CO2. All right, so let's talk about some respiratory system functions. In addition to gas exchange, the respiratory system does four things for us. One, it regulates pH of the extracellular fluid. So our extracellular fluid, remember, is on our interstitial space and our vascular space. Two, contains receptors that gives us the sense of smell. Three, it filters our inspired air. We have to eliminate some impurities that we inhale, right? So every day, one of our lines of defense actually is our respiratory system. So it helps us filter our inspired air, and it eliminates excess heat and water. So it eliminates excess heat and H2O. Right, so that's why if you breathed on a glass or a mirror, it kind of gets condensation, right? Because that's water. Because with each breath you take, everyone eliminates X amount of water. So yes, you can't see it, but it kind of sounds a little weird when you're expecting, everyone is eliminating water with each breath they take, but that is what occurs. Okay, so let's talk about generically what respiration is. Respiration is the process of gas exchange, and it has three major steps to it. One, pulmonary ventilation, which is represented by V and a small capital E. This is the mechanical flow of air into and out of the lungs. So pulmonary ventilation is the mechanical flow of air into and out of the lungs. Two, external respiration. This is the exchange of gas in between the air spaces of the lungs and the pulmonary capillaries. So external respiration is the exchange of gas between the air spaces of the lungs and the pulmonary capillaries, so into the bloodstream there. Three, internal respiration is the exchange of gases between the systemic capillaries and the tissue cells, right? So once we get the air from the air sacs of the lungs into the pulmonary capillaries, now we have the oxygen within our system. Internal respiration then is the exchange of gases between the systemic capillaries, which has that oxygen, and the tissue cells, right? Or just the exchange of gases. Doesn't necessarily just have to be oxygen. There's also a fourth step, and that fourth step would be considered cellular respiration, what happens within the cell themselves. So cells doing cell stuff. But when we go back to internal respiration for a second, it is actually an exchange between the capillaries and the interstitial space, then a secondary exchange between the interstitial space and the cells themselves. But what I want you to know is internal respiration, you go from the systemic capillaries to the tissues. But in order for those nutrients to actually get exchanged, it's actually between the capillaries first into the interstitial space, and then from the interstitial space into the cell. So there's actually a couple more sub-steps in there as well. And then that last and fourth step is once the nutrients are within the cell themselves, it's just cell doing cell stuff. So cellular respiration, right? So us going through all of our metabolic pathways and whatnot. Okay, so we have 6 parts to our respiratory system. We have the nose, the pharynx or our throat, the larynx, which is our voice, the trachea, our bronchi, and our lungs. This is a system of tubes and cavities. So our respiratory system is pretty much a system of tubes and cavities. We can divide this structurally or functionally. So there's two different types of divisions we can do with our respiratory system. Let's go with structural first. Structural subdivisions we consider an upper respiratory system and a lower respiratory system. Our upper respiratory system would be considered our nose and our pharynx, so our nose and our throat. And then lower respiratory system structurally is our larynx, trachea, bronchi, and lungs. So if you've ever heard of someone who's had an upper respiratory infection, that's going to either involve their nose or their throat. If someone has a lower respiratory infection, that can be from the larynx, from their trachea, their bronchi, and also into their lungs. All right, so let's talk now, we did structural subdivisions. Now let's talk about functional subdivisions. So we can also break up the respiratory system functionally. This is considered our conducting and respiratory portions. So number one, let's talk about conducting. This is a series of tubes. So some reside inside and some reside outside of the lungs. So our nose, our pharynx, our larynx, our trachea, our bronchi, our bronchioles, and our terminal bronchioles are considered our conducting portions. These structures will do the following for us. 1, filters the air. 2, it's going to warm the air. 3, it's going to add some moisture to it. And 4, conducts air from point A to point B. So this is ultimately what gives us the thoroughfare through which air can move. Average is about 150 mLs of air at any one point in time. So in this conducting portion of the respiratory system, we average about, if we were to take a measurement, there's probably about 150 mLs of air at any one point in time in that conducting portion. 2, we get functional subdivision. The second subdivision would be our respiratory portion. So we have our conducting portion and then our respiratory portion. These are the tissues we will find within the lung themselves. So we will have 1, our respiratory bronchioles, 2, our alveolar ducts, 3, our alveolar sacs, and 4, our alveoli themselves. Okay, so let's talk about changing volume in the respiratory system. The only way we can change the amount of air in the tubes is to change the dimensions of the tubes, right? Just like blood flow, we increase or decrease the luminal size. It's the same thing with our respiratory system with regards to air getting in and out of the lungs. We're actually going to do this with our beta and alpha receptors. So adrenergic and cholinergic receptors again. So adrenergic, we're going to bind to our beta 2s, in which we're going to be using our norepinephrine and epinephrine. Our cholinergic receptors binds to our alpha receptors, and that uses acetylcholine, right? Kind of just like before. This will ensue passive vasodilation, and we're going to use our catecholamines. All right, so passive vasodilation, what are our catecholamines again? They are norepinephrine and epinephrine. Okay, let's talk about this pressure gradient. In relation to movement of fluid through a tube, we care about this gradient, right? The high pressure is the inflow pressure. And to move fluid through a tube, we have to have a greater inflow pressure compared to the outflow pressure. So the inflow pressure minus the outflow pressure equals our change in pressure. The wider that difference is between the two pressures, the greater the velocity of movement through that tube, whether it be a fluid or air. So we can alter the resistance through that tube. How do we do that? 1, with the length and the diameter. If we double the length, we will double the resistance. So if we double the length of a vessel or any sort of airway conducting tube, if we double the distance, we're going to double the resistance. That makes sense, right? Because it has a lot more to get through then, a lot more length to get through. If we cut the radius in half, we increase the resistance 16-fold. That also makes sense. If we cut the radius down of that luminal size, we then increase the resistance of either airflow or blood or some sort of fluid of a movement through a tube. That makes sense as well. Also, the viscosity of a fluid. The more viscous a fluid is, the more resistance we get, right? So that's just pressure gradients in general, right? So the more viscous we have with regards to blood, the more resistance we're going to have. So now that we reviewed what a pressure gradient was, like we had talked about early in the semester, we're going to talk about partial pressures. What's the definition of a partial pressure? It's the pressure which is exerted by a gas as if it was the only molecular species present. Okay, so it's the pressure which is exerted by a gas as if it was the only molecular species present. So oxygen has its own partial pressure, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, all of those have their own what's considered partial pressures, which makes up the total pressure. Okay, so what is the ambient air made up of? Oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. Right? Oxygen, the percent of oxygen in the air is 20.93%. The percent of nitrogen in the air is 79%. And the percentage of carbon dioxide within our ambient air is 0.03%. Right? So with 20.093% of 760 millimeters of mercury, the partial pressure for O2 would be 0.2093 times 760, which equals 159.068. Right, that makes sense. So with 20.93% of 760 millimeters of mercury, right, because 760 is the pressure at sea level, the partial pressure of O2, you would do the calculation to be 0.2093, right? We got to move that decimal point over to the left twice, right? Because 20.93% would be 0.2093. So we'd do 0.2093 times 760, which is our total pressure, which equals 159.068 millimeters of mercury. So at sea level, the partial pressure of oxygen is about 160 millimeters of mercury, which is about 159. So in order to get the partial pressure of a gas, we need to know 1, what the concentration is, and 2, what the total pressure is, which we do know. So we knew the concentration of O2 in the air, which is 20.93%, and we knew the total pressure that we're talking about at sea level, which is 760. So partial pressure is important because that's what determines our ability to make exchange occur, right? Whether all of these nutrients and like oxygen and carbon dioxide, which we're mainly going to be talking about, partial pressures are extremely important with regards to exchange. How much pressure is being exerted by these molecules is going to determine the ability of the swap that we want to do. So the sum of all partial pressures gives us the total pressure, which is considered Dalton's law. Right, so if I asked you, what is the partial pressure of nitrogen in the ambient air? We know that it is 79%, so we would take 0.79 times it by 760, which is our total pressure, and we get 600.4. So the partial pressure exerted by nitrogen alone is about 600 millimeters of mercury by itself, right? And if we were to take carbon dioxide, so we would take 0.03% and move that over, right? You got a little over, that's a very low number, about a little over 2 millimeters of mercury it exerts itself, right? And then oxygen would be the 0.2093 times the 760, which gives you about the 159, which is close to the 160 mark. So it's, again, and partial pressures are very important with regards to gas exchange, with regards to carbon dioxide exchange, as well as oxygen in and out of the tissues. So in the next screencast, we're really going to be talking about these partial pressures and the movement of oxygen through our respiratory system and into our tissues.